week for SARI training. I apologize. You get my session at the very end when you're probably exhausted. I also apologize. I'm a lawyer by trade. I will try to not talk like a lawyer. Sometimes I find that difficult. If I do say anything that you don't understand, any terminology that I might use, feel free to just put your hand up. I'll take questions as we go along as well. My name is Wayne Mowery. I'm someone at Penn State that wears a couple different hats. First, I'm Director of Compliance within the Office of Ethics and Compliance. You're going to hear about that office frequently at Penn State. It's the place you go if you have any concerns about things you experience or see at Penn State. So if you see somebody committing a crime, right, you can contact our office. If you experience intimidation or retaliation for something you've done, you can contact our office and we will help you, right? I'm also the director of the Export Compliance Office at Penn State, and that's what we're going to be focusing mostly on today. Export compliance is an area of law that deals with the information and materials that we can share with persons who are not U.S. citizens. And that can have a great impact on the type of work that you're going to be doing as graduate students at Penn State. And so that's what we're going to focus on. And I'm also, my last hat is the empowered official. And we'll talk briefly about what that means as well, but it just means I'm empowered to sign certain documents on behalf of the university. And so we'll talk about the fact that you are not empowered to sign documents on behalf of the university, right? And we'll talk about how that can come into play for graduate students. Okay, see if I can get this to work. All right. So, what's the problem? There are a significant amount of tensions between these concepts of export controls and operations of an academic community, right? And so we have on one side of the equation faculty members, right, like this gentleman. And on the other side of the equation, we have guys that dress like this, right? And we call these regulatory enforcement agents. People like the FBI, right? Department of Homeland Security, right? These are the guys that are tasked with enforcing the laws that the United States has passed. And so there is a tension between these two groups. We have faculty members. All they really want to do is get their research done and get it out to the people they want to share it with. And they resent being told who they can work with and what they can work on. At the same time, the enforcement agents look at us and consider faculty members to be reckless, aloof, and honestly oblivious to the concerns that they're trying to rectify on behalf of the government. So we have the faculty members again. They see these regulations as just red tape, right? These are just things to overcome, needless bureaucratic obstacles. The enforcement agents, on the other hand, look at us and they say that we appear to be contemptuous of the international collaborations and the concerns that they have with the sharing of information on a global scale. And so these tensions exist. And part of my job is to help alleviate some of those tensions, right? To figure out how to get faculty members to be able to do what they want to do without ending up with a lot of guys in suits in ear plugs in their ears coming to our campus to conduct investigations. So what are we actually talking about? So export controls, and this is where the lawyer in me comes out, right? I like to define terms before I start talking about them. So when we talk about a system of controls, we're talking about any laws, regulations, actions that a society has decided to take because they think it accomplishes something good or prevents a harm, right? So just basically, when you think of it, a control can be a law that's passed by a legislative body. It can be a regulation passed by a bureaucratic agency. It can be an order, an executive order passed by the president or the president's council in the United States. So there are a lot of ways that we end up with controls. What we're interested today are with export controls. And so export controls, and this is a definition for them, is an actual shipment or transmission of items, services, or technical data out of the United States, or the release of that technology, software, or technical data to a foreign national in the United States, okay? So if we send it out of the United States, we export it. If we give certain information, software, or data to foreign nationals when they're here in the US, we've also exported it. And so we can accomplish these types of transfers in a lot of different ways. One, just by visual inspection. Right? When we let a foreign national into US facilities, we are exporting information about the materials and the equipment and any data that they view while they're in those facilities to that foreign national. Right? So that is an export. We also export things just by talking. Right? Whenever we share information orally with a foreign person, whether in the US or abroad, we've exported that information to them. We can transmit it by shipping it. This is what, when you think of the word export, right, this is what everybody thinks about. I'm going to send something out of the country. But it can be shipment physically or electronically. So we just heard somebody suggest that you collapse all your email into one place. If you email data to a foreign person, you have exported that information to them, right? And then the last one, when we provide a service. So if we teach someone how to use controlled equipment or materials, we have exported them a service. We've provided a service to that foreign person. And again, it doesn't matter if that service happens in the United States or not, right? If it's provided to a foreign person, it's an export. So there are three basic areas of export law that we need to be concerned about, especially here at Penn State. There are others, but there are three that we focus on. And these three are from the Department of State, and they govern military critical technologies. And their list is called the munitions list, and their regulations are called the ITAR, and that stands for the International Traffic in Arms Regulation. Now you may be sitting there thinking, what do we do at Penn State that would appear on those lists? Well, we do a lot of things at Penn State that appear on those lists. We work with things like submersibles, right? We generate computer code for the Navy and the Army and the Air Force, right? We design evaluation tools for those military entities. We send things into space, right? For space research and also for military purposes. We participate in a lot of activities that have potential military applications. And so we do work at Penn State that is ITAR controlled. The second area is the Commerce Department. Commerce regulations are governing what's called dual-use technologies. And the way I like to explain this, the example I like to give is microwave technology. How many people have ever used a microwave oven? Right? Pretty much all of us in this room. Microwave technology was originally developed and applied in military environments, right? So back in the 1930s, they were working on microwave technology for a military application, and the engineer who was working in the lab set his lunch next to the microwave transmitter. When he went to get lunch, he found out that his sandwich had been cooked, because the microwave transmitter at that point in time was not fully shielded. Right? And so he had been messing around with this microwave transmitter and cooked his lunch. That's where we get microwave ovens from. Right? That research was happening in a military lab. Right?
Is it Lincoln Lab? No.
What?
Is it Lincoln Lab?
Lincoln Lab?
Yeah, Lincoln Lab at MIT research.
Yeah. Yeah. So the point is, we still use military technology. We still use microwave technology for military purposes. Right? There's still military applications to that technology. However, everybody here knows what a microwave oven is, right? And we can go out in the United States and buy them in almost any store that you walk into, including grocery stores, right? And so it's become a commercial item. And so that type of technology, except when it's being used specifically for a military purpose, is going to be controlled by the Commerce Department, because we're not protecting the military application under commerce. We're protecting our financial benefit that we gain from marketing that technology. So we don't want it to get out into the world too far unless we are the ones that are exploiting it for financial gain, right? Because it was created here. The last section is a little bit different from the first two. The first two deal with technology types, right? Technology that's related to defense, technology that has dual purposes. The last section deals with people and countries that we can't work with. And we call them embargoes or sanctions. And so the Treasury Department literally maintains a list of countries, companies, and individuals that it's against the law for US persons to work with. And you end up on these lists for a number of different reasons, right? If you support terrorism, obviously you end up on one of those lists. If you're involved in the global narcotics trade, you end up on one of these lists. If you've been accused or found guilty of trafficking in human persons, you end up on one of these lists. If you violate US export control laws, you end up on one of these lists, right? And so one of the reasons why we tell you about these things is to help you understand that there are consequences for violating these regulations. And one of the potential violations is not being able to work with US people, which puts a huge crimp on your career plans, right? So if you end up on one of these lists, it makes it very hard to work with any company that has a US base, because they're going to search these lists and find out that you are a restricted person. And so at Penn State, we search these lists quite frequently for people that we're working with to determine, before we start working with them, whether they are on one of the lists. And if they are, then we make a decision most of the time not to work with them, or to put controls into place to limit the amount of exposure that we have. So where are we vulnerable at Penn State? So this is the definition of export under the military regulations. So this is ITAR. An export means transferring technical data to a foreign person, whether in the United States or abroad. So that's very broad, because technical data includes any information required for the design, development, production, manufacture, assembly, operation, repair, testing, maintenance, or modification of a defense article. And we've asked them, and yes, that "or" is on purpose. So if we provide information to a foreign person on how to do any one of those things related to a defense article, we've committed an export. So the question becomes, how do we get anything done? Right? How do we do anything at Penn State? Well, fortunately, most of the research we do is exempt, right? And most of it is exempt because it is the term technical data does not include information concerning general scientific, mathematical, or engineering principles commonly taught in schools, colleges, and universities, or any information that's in the public domain. So if the information has already been published, it can't be controlled. If it's the type of stuff we normally teach in classes, it can't be controlled. It's exempt. So that releases a lot of what we do, but not everything, right? And the public domain includes anything that is basic and applied research in the science and engineering where the resulting information is ordinarily published and shared broadly. So if we are doing research, and we typically share that information to the public in the form of publications or presentations at conferences, then it will be covered under this concept of fundamental research. And so 98% of the work that we do at Penn State outside of our controlled facilities, right? We have classified facilities. Those are treated differently. But 98% of the work in the general university environment is exempt because it's fundamental research. We are undertaking the research with the intention of publishing it. We are doing the type of work that is normally shared at open international conferences. It's exempt. However, fundamental research must be distinguished from research where we have accepted a restriction for proprietary reasons or specific US government access and dissemination controls. That's a lot of lawyer speak. What it really means is we have a huge incentive to not enter into agreements which contain what they call access and dissemination controls. And an access or dissemination control is a restriction on foreign national participation. So sometimes we get agreements that say we want you to do research, but we don't want you to let anybody who's a foreign person work on this project, right? And so that is an access restriction. We've now limited access to the program. It also includes any publication restrictions. We also receive agreements all the time from sponsors or government agencies that say, okay, we want you to do X, but we don't want you to publish it unless we tell you it's okay to publish it. Right? And that's called a publication restriction. They have the right to refuse our ability to publish. And so if we accept either one of those, we're in trouble. So if there are no foreign national or no publication restrictions, it's not subject to anybody's approval, then we can claim fundamental research. Because we can take that information, we can put a foreign national on the project, we can teach them how to do things, and in the end, we're going to end up publishing the results. And so our government says, why should we have any concerns? Because somebody can go into the library and pick up the journal in which the information is published and learn about it themselves. So we can't control it on the front end if it's already released to the public, going to be released to the public on the back end. However, if it's subject to their approval, then we end up with losing this fundamental research exclusion, right? So if it's fundamental research is excluded, if we lose that, then we have to figure out what we're going to do. When we lose the fundamental research exclusion, any exchange of technical data with a foreign national may constitute a controlled export. Now, it's going to be an export. The question is whether it's a controlled export, right? Will the government require us to get approval to share that information with the foreign nationals? So, just to hit some of the highlights here. If we lose the fundamental exclusion, we may have to tell foreign nationals to get out of the lab when we do certain research, right? That's not really conducive to developing a camaraderie between graduate students, right? Because you're going to be working with a bunch of folks in your labs who are US citizens and Chinese citizens and South Korean citizens and Indian citizens and Saudi Arabian citizens, right? We have people from all over the world at Penn State. And so it's very uncomfortable for faculty members or others to have to tell people they can't come in when we're doing certain work. Second thing, the first rule about export controlled research is you don't talk about it. So most of your faculty members and your advisor will probably encourage you to get together on a regular basis to talk about your projects with other graduate students in your area. If you're working on a control project, you can't do that, because most of those other graduate students are going to be foreign nationals. And so that is very problematic for us. When we do have the fundamental research exclusion, it's all about the science or the research, right? We don't care who's working on the project, we don't care where it's being done, we don't care when it's being done, right? It's just about getting it done. It's about attracting the best and brightest minds. Again, we have faculty members who work in highly controlled areas that have had to make the decision not to bring in foreign graduate students, right? And that means they are overlooking sometimes the best qualified students. But because of the regulations, they can't manage that process. And so they've decided to limit their labs to US students only. Finally, we recognize that the government's always free to implement controls whenever they want. They can do what's called classification, right? They can classify technology at any point in time and tell us, because this is now sensitive, you can't share it. And we prefer that. Right? Let us do the work on the front end. If you decide as the government that it's too sensitive now, you can tell us in the future and we'll stop sharing it. Right? So, the university and the national security community, they both contribute to US national security and commercial advantage interests. Right? We're all involved in creating new technology. That's part of what you're going to do at Penn State as a graduate student. You're going to be doing novel research that's designed to end up creating new technologies or new advancements in technology, right? And that's done by US universities, national labs, and US companies. And we create all this stuff, and there's this desire to protect certain existing technology using these regulations. And our goal is to try to get most of this stuff through this barrier, as much as we can, all right? And we have to do that while respecting our concerns about military superiority and national security and economic viability. And so our goal is to figure out the best way to get most of what we do through that barrier, and to allow us to do things like collaborate with foreign nationals. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, just so you understand, this is a big process, right? US universities, and this is a couple years old now, I have to update this, right? It's about 5 years old. But back in 2011, they did approximately $62.3 billion of science and engineering research. That's a lot of research that's being done at our campuses. And that research did things like develop new technologies, create jobs, right? And contribute to our economic and military superiority. And so there's huge value to doing this stuff here. It's much less expensive for companies to come to us to do R&D than it is to set up an in-house R&D office or lab, right? They don't have to buy the equipment. They don't have to pay the manpower as much. They don't have to deal with the regulatory issues, right? So it's much easier for them to come to Penn State and say, I want to give Penn State $2 million to research X. If they tried to do it in their own facilities, it would probably cost them 5 times that amount just to get it up and running. And we're not in a position to do this type of research without foreign nationals. So earlier, the previous speaker asked how many people were going to be taking a class in the US for the first time, and it was about half of you, right? Right? That's actually low. So this is the College of Engineering, 60. Actually, this is low too. I thought I updated this. Sorry, wrong slide. So this is from fall of 2014. The fall of 2015 numbers were 67%. So 67% of the graduate students in our College of Engineering, which I would say is one of our higher risk areas for export compliance purposes, are foreign nationals. Right? So if we had to tell all those students not to work on projects because they were controlled, we'd never get anything done. And that increases just about every year by 2 to 3%. So 10 years ago, it was down in the 40s. Now it's in the high 60s, and I don't think that's going to change, right? There's just a huge shift of focus, especially in the United States. US graduate students are largely not going into the STEM science fields, right? Not in huge numbers. They're going more into the liberal arts or becoming people like me who are lawyers or doctors, right? Medicine, accounting, business management, that type of executive program, and they're not going into the science fields as much. And so these numbers are going to continue to increase. So this is based on 2013-14. International student registrations in the US increased 8.1% to almost 900,000 foreign students in the US. Of those, 274,000, almost 275,000 were Chinese students. That represented 31% of the total international student population, are Chinese students. Now, that poses a problem for us in some areas because, unfortunately, we still have a somewhat dissentious relationship with China. In certain ways, we work with them very well. In other ways, we do not, right? And so, this is why the government regulatory agents look at us and say, what the heck are you doing? You've got 275,000 Chinese students working in the sciences in the US. How are you preventing them from making off with our restricted information, right? Indian student registrations numbered a little over 100,000. That was 11.6%. South Korean student registrations numbered nearly 68,000, or 7.7%. So if you combine those, the Asian region, just with 3 countries, represented approximately 50% of the foreign students registered in the US. If you took the entire Southeast Asian region and combined them together, you're looking at about 60%. So that's where our students are coming from in the US, especially at the graduate level. To put this in perspective, there are 3 times more foreign students in the US than US students that we send abroad. So we send about a little less than 300,000 students abroad every year from the US, but we bring about 900,000 into the US. And again, those are trends that are not going to change, right? So you guys, especially the international students, but all of you, are very valuable resources at Penn State. I don't know if you've ever been called a resource before, but again, as a lawyer, I tend to speak in generalities like that sometimes. You're a resource. Why? Because you're going to do a lot of good things for us, right? That's what a resource does. It provides a benefit. And so if we had to exclude foreign nationals from our labs, what would happen, right? Would we have enough high-quality students to perform the research we want to do if we didn't have these foreign national students? And the answer is probably no. And how how much do we actually gain from having you guys here, right? So you guys are not only receiving information, right? You're creating new stuff that you're sharing with us, and you're bringing new perspectives, new ideas into our communities, right? And we benefit from that. Some places call this the reverse brain drain, right? By bringing in the best and brightest from other countries, we're reducing their capabilities and bringing it here. We're draining their ability to expand on their own resources, right? We want to be able to benefit from that. So, again, fundamental research is critical. And this goes back to the Reagan administration. Most of you were too young to remember Ronald Reagan. I apologize. I actually do remember him. There's Ronald Reagan, President of the United States, back in the 1980s, and he said it was the policy of the administration that to the maximum extent possible, the products of fundamental research remain unrestricted. So the government, the highest level of our executive branch, said, if it's fundamental research, we don't want anybody putting controls on it. Because that's how we do things like create an environment conducive to creativity, right? If we put a restriction on it, we're going to stifle development. And this has been confirmed by people like Condoleezza Rice back in 2001, and John Young Jr. back in 2008. So we're talking about multiple presidential administrations. And even most recent example I have is Ashton Carter. And for those of you who know who Ashton Carter, back then he was the Undersecretary of Defense. He's now the US Secretary of Defense. So it's very high up in the administration. These folks are all saying the same thing. Research that is fundamental should be managed in a way that it does not become subject to restrictions. So why do we have a problem? Well, because even though our government says that, they don't always do what they say, right? And so we tell people if a project is truly sensitive or inappropriate for public release, right, if there's a true reason to control it, we have a couple options. We can reject the project. We can refuse to do it, right? So if a sponsor comes and says, this is really sensitive stuff, you can't share it. We can just refuse to do it. We can subject the entire project to what we call a technology control plan. And this is an internal arrangement that we set up at Penn State, and we look at the project and say, where are you performing it? Who's working on it? How are you going to protect the information and materials? And we make everybody who's working on that project sign that agreement, right? This is how you're going to work on this project in a way that's not going to put at risk these sensitivities. Or we can also work with the government to either get the restriction out, right, if it's not appropriate, and that happens, right? So Army Corps of Engineers, this is a true story, they used to really love to do this. They would put a term in all their agreements funding research that said the only foreign nationals that can work on this project are the custodial staff and the yard maintenance staff. Now, not only is there no rational reason for that in most of these agreements, because what we were doing wasn't controlled, but that's really disgusting language, right? It's discriminatory. It puts down the value of our foreign people that are at Penn State. And so we would push back all the time and ask them, why is that in there? And they could never give us an answer. And in fact, the diabolical lawyer in me says, if I really want to infiltrate a project, I probably want to be on the custodial staff because I'm working in that lab when no one else is there. And I have a key to everything, right? So, the response back to them is, this is not only unnecessary and irrelevant, it's non-functional, right? If you're saying this is so sensitive, we shouldn't have any foreign people working on it, we shouldn't allow custodial staff who are foreign persons to have access to those spaces either. And we usually got that out almost all the time. A couple times they refused and we walked away from those projects. But when we walk away, the money comes in and goes out pretty quick, right? It never sees our bottom line. And so we can't do that. But sometimes we work with the government and we manage to segregate portions of the project and say, this portion of the project is controlled, this portion is not. And when we do that, we can say, faculty member X is going to do this in his office. A lot of times it's things like taking the data that's been generated and analyzing it and applying it to a particular fact pattern or application that the PI is aware of, the faculty member is aware of that benefits the sponsor, but maybe the graduate students who are collecting the data and conducting the research aren't necessarily aware of. Or it could be just literally this portion of the project has to have access to a sensor that's controlled, but these people don't need to have physical access to the sensor to collect the data. And so they can work on collecting the data, but only US persons will have access to the actual physical sensor itself. And we've done both those things, right? And so when we can do that, we do that because it allows us to involve as many people in those projects as possible. So again, we have a very good reason for protecting our fundamental research status. So when we lose it, it's not because, when we do this, when we reject a control project, it's not because we don't care about national defense. And sometimes our enforcement agency friends will tell us that. You guys just really don't care about protecting the US, right? And that's not true, right? It's also, it's not because we want to just share information with bad guys, right? Most of our faculty don't work with anybody that will appear on any of those lists of people we shouldn't work with. And most of them aren't trying to work in locations that our government says are high risk, like Iran, North Korea, Syria, and Sudan. Cuba used to be on there, it still is somewhat, right? But it's getting a little bit easier to work in Cuba. But most of our faculty aren't looking to work in those areas of the world. And it's not because we just want to limit the advancement within the US. We don't put these restrictions in place just to slow things down. It's really because we have to protect you as individuals and the institution as a whole. Because one thing I always like to highlight, these export control laws, it's what's called strict liability, so you don't know that you're violating it. You don't have to know that you're violating it to be found liable, right? So it's like speeding. You don't have to necessarily know what the speed limit is, right, to get a speeding ticket, right? You just have to speed, right? In this world, you don't have to know that it's controlled. You just have to export it when you shouldn't, right? And it's also known as another legal term, joint and several liability. What that means is everybody that's a party to the transaction is liable fully for the action. And so you as an individual are just as liable as Penn State and just as liable as me, because one of the things that I do as the empowered official and the export compliance officer is I say I'm responsible for Penn State's compliance. So I can go to jail and you can go to jail. There have been faculty members that have gone to jail for violating these rules. And so it is very serious, right? And so my goal is to never have a Penn State faculty or student go to jail, or myself. I really don't want to go to jail, right? So again, we've covered all this, so I'm just going to cover it, but we haven't talked about number 3. Specifically, as graduate students, you're going to be required to produce things like theses, right? If we accept a publication restriction on a project that you're working on, right, as part of your thesis, and the sponsor comes back and says, you can't publish that, now what do you do?
That is nothing.
What?
That means I did nothing for graduation.
Yeah. So you need to have that thesis to graduate, right? You're not going to get your PhD or in some programs your master's without producing a publishable paper.
I cannot tell committee that in last 4 years I work for DoD and I have nothing to tell to you.
Yeah, exactly. They're going to look at you and say, that's too bad. We can't pass you, right? And we have had this happen at Penn State, right? We've had situations where we've had graduate students and we didn't, this is many years ago, we've done a much better job of this recently. We didn't know we had a publication restriction that applied to their work, right? And they got ready for their thesis defense and the faculty member knew that they were supposed to share that with the sponsor for review. They didn't know it was review and approve, right? They shared it with the sponsor and the sponsor came back and said, you can't release that to the public. And that happened like the day before the thesis defense. So what do you do, right? In those cases, we were able to figure out, in some cases, they didn't have the right to tell us we couldn't publish it. In some cases they did, and we had to get all the people that were on the committee to sign a non-disclosure agreement saying they weren't going to disclose any information that was shared. And then the student had to work to revise their thesis to remove the controlled information after the fact. So it's very important for us not to accept these restrictions so we avoid those situations. Another thing we're really concerned about that we haven't talked about. One of the important things about academic research is that it's published and shared with other academics, right? And the reason we do that is because if something works, we want people to know. If something doesn't work, we likewise want other people to know. Because we've seen situations where a sponsor has said, don't publish this research because it doesn't work, and we don't want our competitors to benefit off of our $10 million investment to find out that this approach doesn't work. But what ends up happening then is another company spends $10 million proving again that something doesn't work, right? It's a waste of resources. Time, money, effort, all that stuff. Likewise, we've seen situations, again, luckily not at Penn State. This was at a school in the Midwest, right? Faculty member was doing research on a drug, a new drug. It was a clinical trial, right? And as part of the clinical trial, they determined that the drug was harmful to humans in a very high percentage of cases for a drug trial. So we're talking maybe like 10 to 15% mortality rate, right? Very high, right? When they looked at the agreement, so the faculty member was getting ready to publish, told the sponsor, hey, this stuff is dangerous, we can't be doing this. I'm going to publish a paper that talks about the physiological impact of this particular drug combination. And when they looked at the agreement, when they contacted the sponsor said, you can't publish without our permission. And we don't give you permission to publish that result. We think it's wrong. Right? We think your research is invalid. We think that you conducted the research inappropriately, and we think your results are inflated. And so we're not giving you permission to publish. That potentially puts at risk people.
That seems like an ethical thing.
It is an ethical thing, right? But the contract said they had the right to tell us not to, or tell that school not to publish. In that situation, the faculty member decided to publish anyway. I don't know if the company sued the university to recover the money that they provided as part of that research. They would have been under their right, under the contract. It would have been a hard case to win, I can tell you that as a lawyer, to go into court and try to win back money because you didn't want people to tell the world that your drug was killing people. But they had the right to do that. I would guess that the university will never get funds from that pharmaceutical company ever again.
Sorry for the question on the specific, but would that particular faculty member, would they have gotten whistleblower protection in that case?
From the university, probably,
Okay.
but not for any liability to the company. That's because there's no relationship there other than as an agent of the university. Yeah, so the faculty member would not have been penalized by the university, and I'm pretty sure she was not in that case. But it just emphasizes the fact that we don't want to ever be put in that situation where we have to decide, are we going to intentionally violate the terms of a contract because of an ethical determination? And I like to think we would, right? But there's financial repercussions to doing that, right? So I want to talk about a particular example of how export controls can come into play for you guys. You may be asked to travel internationally during your time at Penn State as a representative of the university, either to go to a conference or to go to a collaborator's site to conduct research, to meet with potential future collaborators, to conduct interviews with potential new students. There are a lot of reasons why graduate students get asked to travel on behalf of the university. We have a university policy, policy 8089, and I apologize again, we have about 200 policies plus at Penn State, right? So you're not going to probably spend your time reading all of them. I'm going to reference this one, but it requires a pre-departure export review for all university business travel, right? So when you're traveling on behalf of the university, you have to have an export review done before you travel. Because of things like, who are you working with? How do we know that the people you're meeting with aren't on the lists of people we can't work with, And so we're going to screen those individuals. Are you taking technology with you that is controlled for your destination? Right? All right. So if you're going to Iran, to a conference, right? And we do have faculty members and students who want to go to Tehran for a conference, right? Our government says just to attend a conference in Iran, you need a license, right? Not to present, not to conduct research, just to attend a conference, because we consider that providing a financial benefit to the country, right? We're paying money, so you need a license. So those are the types of things we do in these reviews. For graduate students, the first thing you have to figure out is, why are you traveling, right? If you are traveling to conduct your own research as part of your graduate studies, you're traveling as an individual. I'm glad to help you. I am not responsible for you in that situation, legally, right? I have to draw a line somewhere. And so I'm glad to give you resources, talk to you about risks, but you are individually responsible in that situation. If, however, you're traveling at the request of your faculty sponsor or advisor, or you're working on a faculty-led project, or you're just doing something that is part of your graduate assistantship, right? You know, you're teaching a class and you're going with the class to do some field work, then you're traveling as an employee, as a representative of the university in one way or another. And so then we are responsible for you. So we have to create that distinction in our systems, right? So again, if you're traveling purely in pursuit of your degree, it's educational travel, and I don't have to do an export review, right? You still will have to register that travel so we know where you are, and so we can provide you health insurance, right, while you're there, but you don't have to have an export review done. For all other travel by graduate students, you have to have an export review done. We also require that all student travel be registered in what's known as the Travel Safety Network, or through Education Abroad if it's an embedded program, right? And what the Travel Safety Network is, it's a database, right? You go in, you enter your travel information, and you answer questions that help you identify, do we need to do an export review, do we not? And if we do, here's the type of information we need, and it's all done within one system, right? So you need to be aware of this. Another feature of the TSN is it will tell you if you need to purchase insurance, right? So if you need to purchase health insurance for your foreign travel, it will tell you that you should or must purchase this insurance. And we recommend you do that. The insurance is very cheap. We've brokered a deal with an insurance agent that provides international insurance for $1.13 a day. You get 100% coverage, 0 deductible, no out-of-pocket expenses for your entire time abroad. It's the cheapest insurance you're ever going to get on a health market. And to give you an idea, we had a student, a graduate student recently, and then TSN's new, so she didn't do the TSN. She didn't know that she was supposed to purchase insurance. She thought her own health insurance would cover her while she was in Panama. She went to Panama. She contracted a couple different types of diseases, including dengue fever, right? She was in the hospital for about 2 weeks. She suffered appendicitis as a result of the complications from the dengue fever and had to have her appendix removed. And the way it works in a lot of these countries is they don't let you out of the hospital until you pay your bill. And her bill was about $40,000. Now, I don't know about you. I am not a graduate student, and I don't really have $40,000 lying around to pay a health bill. I'm assuming you guys don't either. And her parents didn't have $40,000 lying around. And she was stuck in Panama, couldn't get out of the hospital, couldn't be released from the country until she paid the bill. And so in that situation, Penn State did step up and pay the bill because we have an obligation to protect our students. However, we can't do that on a regular basis, right? You know, people talk constantly about the cost of education. Those are the types of things that drive up the cost of education. If we have that happen 10 times in a year, that's $400,000, right? That we have to recover from somewhere else. And so that's why it's important that you register in the TSN, and it's simple, tsn.psu.edu, and it will tell you that you need to purchase insurance, and it will tell you how to do that. So again, why do we care from an export perspective about foreign travel? Well, where are you going? Are you going to one of those high-risk destinations? We really care about that, right? We had a graduate student who was researching certain things about cultural customs in traditional Islamic cultures, right? And she wanted to conduct research in the desert of Iran, which is in and of itself a very dangerous thing. But because she was going to be visiting some of these tribal, groups, some ethnic groups that don't necessarily like one another, that share regions in Iran, her plan of protection was to hire some armed guards and drive from place to place in a pickup truck with armed sentries in the back protecting her. That's of high concern to us, right? We want to know if that's your plan, because we're going to tell you that's no longer your plan, right? If you want to do that on your own time, have at it. We can't stop you, but you're not doing that as part of your degree programs here. Find another way to get your data, right? We care about who you're working with. Again, had a faculty member going to China, for those of you who are Chinese, to go to a couple conferences. Conferences at 3 different Chinese universities, right? So first, at the top of your head, you're like, no problem, right? Going to a couple of universities, going to give presentations, talk about potential future collaborations. Contacted me, I did my screening against these lists. The first 2 universities were just fine, no problems. Go to the conferences, talk about future collaborations. If something comes up, let's talk about it. We can figure out if there's any control technology that might be involved. The 3rd university is a university in China that's largely funded by the Chinese military. There's a couple of them in China, right, that get a lot of their funding from the Chinese military. At least that's what our government says, right? And I don't get to change the regulations, right? They say China's paying for those students using military funding. We don't want US people to work with that university because we think everything that goes there is going to go directly to the Chinese military. So what do? Faculty member was leaving in like 5 days to go on this trip to China. Talked with him, I said, look, here's what you can do. You can go to that conference, you can go to that university. However, you can't let them pay for anything. So they can't pay for your travel. They can't waive the registration fee. They can't pay for your hotel or your food or anything like that, because the minute you accept a benefit from them, you violated this law. Likewise, you can't leave anything behind other than things that are already in the public domain. So if you're going to give a talk, all your slides have to be information that's already been publicly released. All your information has to be general, non-specific, non-application oriented, right? And the faculty member said, yeah, it's not worth it. Because I also told him, you want to create future collaborations, you want to work with people, well, we can't collaborate with that university very easily. So don't waste your time trying to talk about future collaborations with people that we may not be able to work with. And so for that faculty member, he decided not to go to that 3rd conference. Still went to the other 2 conferences. They were fine. He could have gone to the 3rd conference. I didn't tell him no. I said, here's what you have to do if you're going to go there. And the faculty member decided it wasn't worth it. So that we do those screenings on people we work with. Those lists change all the time. Everybody we screen is rescreened every day. So everybody we've screened over the last 2.5 years gets rescreened every night. So if they get added to the list. What are you taking with you? GPS units can be controlled for certain destinations. Just even simple handheld GPS units, right? Computers can be controlled for certain destinations. So you want to take your laptop to Iran, you can't, right? That's what the law says. At least the university laptop. You can take a personal laptop because there's an exception to the rule for laptops for Iran if it's a personally owned device, but not if it's a business-owned device. And it's my job to know those things. So when people say, I'm going to Iran, I want to take my Penn State laptop with me, I can say, no. Can't take your Penn State laptop, you can take your personal laptop. Right? Why are you going? Right? If you're going to a conference, that's my concern meter drops, unless you're going to a highly restricted or risky location, right? Like China, right? Not highly controlled, but somewhat risky, right? So why are you going? If you're going for a conference, I don't care. If you're doing research, one of the things about fundamental research, again, remember, we like to claim fundamental research. The definition of fundamental research says it has to be done in the US. So if you're conducting field research abroad, we cannot claim fundamental research over that portion of your work. So I want to know so we can look at what you're actually going to do and see if it's controlled. Most of the time, again, it's not. But we have to at least conduct that analysis. So how do you obtain this export review? Again, all you have to do is complete the TSN. In the TSN, there's a section called the export form. It'll ask you 6 simple questions. Why are you going? Who are you working with? What are you taking with you? What are you trying to accomplish? Are you going to a conference? And is there anything else you need to, is there any foreign funding involved by somebody who is not otherwise listed in this registration? Simple questions, right? You complete that, we get notified, we review every international trip that's conducted for Penn State business. Most of those we spend less than a minute looking at because it's to a conference and we don't care and all we're going to do is screen the people that are involved. But if something sets up a red flag in our mind, we're going to spend a little bit more time looking at it. And so we've reviewed about 10,000 trips over the last 2.5 years. Again, most of the time, you'll complete that form, you'll never hear from us. Again, there is information in the system telling you about things like laptops and what you should and shouldn't do when you're abroad, right? So for example, another thing, if you're abroad, don't connect to unsecured Wi-Fi networks, right? Why? It's not an export issue, it's an IT security issue, right? Very easy to implant, malware using those types of environments, right? And again, if it's an education abroad trip, you'll go through the education abroad office. So if it's like you're taking undergraduate students on a study abroad trip during spring break to Italy, you won't necessarily complete the TSN. You may go through education abroad. So practical suggestions when you're doing your foreign travel, have all your information with you, things like your passport, your travel information, because you'll need it. If you're traveling purely for educational purposes, make sure you select student travel, right? You'll go through a step process. The first page says, I'm traveling as an individual or a group. You click individual, and then it's going to ask you, I'm traveling as an undergraduate student, as a graduate student, as a faculty member, as a non-PSU person. You'll click graduate student, and then the next question will be, I'm traveling as part of my degree program. I'm traveling as part of my graduate assistantship. I'm traveling on a sponsored project. So you need to just click the right things and it'll get you in the right queue. Again, select faculty, staff, and then register about 30 days out, right? The export review doesn't take us very long, but there are other things. So for example, how many people here know that you need the graduate school's permission to go to Mexico? You do. Because the US has an active warning against travel to Mexico, because there are certain regions of Mexico where it's very dangerous to go. And so the graduate school at Penn State has a process in place to approve student travel to places with an active US State Department warning. And so if you want to go to Mexico, you have to get this graduate school to say, okay. And that's built into the TSN process. And they like at least 30 days to do that. So that's why we recommend at least 30 days out. Because most people don't think of Mexico as someplace dangerous to go, right? Because millions of Americans go to Mexico every year. But it's a requirement of the graduate school. Again, not export compliance, but that's all built into the TSN system. So if you register as a graduate student to go to Mexico, the TSN will tell you you need to contact the graduate school and get approval. And so if you contact them inside of 30 days, they may say, sorry, we're not even processing it. It takes us at least 30 days to process it. And they'll tell you you can't go. If you have questions about that system, tsn@psu.edu. I don't run the TSN, I just put my stuff in there. We tried to build all the foreign travel stuff into one system to make it easier. But this is just an example of the types of things we're looking at from an export compliance perspective. And so, where does that leave us? Again, let's go back to the beginning. My job here in this role is to not be an impediment to your research activities. I'm here to facilitate you getting your research done, right? I promote fundamental research whenever I can, right? When necessary, I put in place things to restrict activities that are required by law. And then I'm also here to protect you and the faculty of the university from violating laws that they're not even aware of, right? You don't have to know the export laws. You don't want to know them. They're about 1,500 pages long altogether, right? A lot of legal speak to read. Yeah, shorter than Patriot Act, but there's export stuff in the Patriot Act. So that's just the regulations that I cited. There are other laws, right? But yeah, so it's pretty long and it's very dense stuff, right? It's not easy to read unless you've been trained as a lawyer to understand what some of those things mean. And finally, I put in place procedures to help mitigate those risks, right? That's what the TSN does. It helps mitigate a risk for you and for the university. And I do education like this. Finally, I just want to give you a couple parting shots, right? As a graduate student at Penn State in a technology sector, do not be bullied into taking actions or risks in this area, right? There are real consequences to violating these laws. If you ever have a doubt, you can contact our office, and you will not be retaliated against, right? We will investigate it, we'll provide you resources, we'll provide you guidance, and if there is real intimidation going on, right, we'll provide you help. Secondly, and this goes back to the fact that I'm an empowered official. That means I can sign certain things for the university. Your faculty member and yourself have no authority to sign documents on behalf of Penn State, right? If you are asked to sign something and you're not comfortable with it, again, talk to us. Another example, had a faculty member, not in IST, in another tech sector, faculty member wanted to import some chemicals from the UK. There is a specific law on importation of chemicals that says you have to designate whether it's a hazardous chemical or not. And so FedEx sent us this form, sent it to the faculty member and said, you need to certify that this material is not hazardous and you have to sign it and send it back to us. And here's the act, here's the law that you have to comply with. And so the faculty member was in a hurry, right, and gave it to a staff assistant. And the staff assistant thought, oh, maybe I should talk to somebody like Wayne about this, because this sort of sounds like import-export stuff, which is in my area. And so they sent it to me, and I looked at it, and I'm like, well, I'm going to have to research this chemical to see what it is and see if it's on any of these lists. And I'm like, I'll get back to you in an hour or two. And so we researched it in my office. We figured out that it was a hazardous chemical, but it was already commercially available in the US, so importing it did not require a license, right? Because you could go out to a US chemical vendor and buy it. It didn't matter that it was coming from the UK. So we filled out the form, I signed everything in my capacity as an empowered official. We sent it back to FedEx. FedEx said, oh, we don't need this. Somebody already sent us a signed form. Now there are two people that can sign for import-export stuff at Penn State, myself and our corporate controller. And I knew he didn't sign it because he would have looked at it and said, Wayne, you take care of this, right? That's not really his job. We just need to have two. And so I'm like, how did this get done? So we asked FedEx to send us the first form they received. And it was signed by a graduate student. And so they signed their name, and as their title, they put grad student, right? And they sent it to FedEx. And the reason they did that is the faculty member was told they had to wait to get an approval. They went to their graduate student and said, I want this now. Figure out how to fill this out and send it back to FedEx. And they did. And they filled it out wrong, right? Again, the law is very complex. So I had to figure it out myself. Not something I work with every day. Graduate student had no idea how to fill it out. Filled it out wrong, sent it to FedEx. We had potential liability there. We caught it in advance. We told FedEx, Can you destroy that one and take our form? They didn't have authority to sign that. Take the real one. We talked with that faculty member and said, you cannot be doing that. You can't be forcing your graduate students to sign things they're not authorized to sign. So again, don't sign anything that looks official if it makes you uncomfortable. Talk to somebody first. If you see anything suspicious, contact me. If you do a Google search for Game of Pawns, there are foreign governments that are trying to get US graduate students to commit acts of espionage on behalf of foreign governments. It happens. It's a real story, this gentleman, Glenn Duffy Shriver. He was actually found coming back into the US with cash strapped to his body that was given to him by a foreign government agency, right, to conduct espionage activities within the US. Again, it doesn't happen a lot. I don't want you to be fearful of the government, foreign government agents around every corner. But if you see something suspicious, report it. And that's going to be Penn State's new model. If you see something, say something. And that doesn't just apply to export controls. It applies to anything that has ethical or compliance application. So if you see a crime being committed, say something. If you see somebody being attacked or abused or intimidated or discriminated against, say something, right? If you see somebody trying to ship Shiga toxin producing E. coli out of the US without talking to me first, say something, right? You're probably not going to see that in your college, but it happens at Penn State.
You realize only faculty say level 1, level 2 at mass.
It's BSL-2 for Shiga toxin. Yeah. So always remember, you can always report this stuff anonymously as well. You don't have to tell us who you are. So if you see something and you don't feel comfortable saying who you are, call the hotline. And then be aware of your role. Again, you are a PSU person now, right? You are a PSU student. You're going to be a PSU employee in some of your roles as a graduate assistant. That means you're subject to our policies. And it also means you get the benefits of our support, right? And so use it. And that's it. Any other questions? You're free to go. I'm sorry, I ran over by about 6 minutes. Yes?
So if you are taking a high-risk type of project, is that pretty much a blanket denial approval, or is there supposed to have funding that allows you to have security?
Yeah, it depends, right? In some areas, it could be a blanket denial, but most of the time it would depend on the terms under which that research is being conducted. And so we would have to evaluate the contracts to see, are we conducting this with the intent to publish at the end? And are we free to publish? And have we accepted any restrictions on participation in the project? And if we had, then we have to, because the First Amendment in the US trumps everything else, right? So we have the ability to publish. We can share we can publish anything we want, and government can't stop us from doing that unless there's a legal or contractual obligation to do so.
Right. But what I mean is, so going back to the Iran research,
Yep.
the reason denied there was because the plan was
Right.
extremely unsecure.
Right.
So if you have a project you want to do that involves a high-risk situation, would security be something that is approved by the university and selected by them?
Yes. Yeah. So in those cases, we would hopefully work with you to come up with a process, a program that we felt comfortable with, and then we would approve the program of study. In that case, we couldn't come up with another reasonable alternative given where that student wanted to work. It was just, right caught in the middle between Sunni and Shiite, right? Groups, and that's just hazardous in and of itself, just being there, especially as a non-Iranian, blonde-haired, 22-year-old female student, right? So when you put it all together, it was just not a good idea, right? And we couldn't figure out a way to do it, so we said you have to find another place to do this research. And it actually turned out you could do that research in another location that was less hazardous. But the best data probably would have come from that location, but we couldn't support it. But in most cases, we are going to ask, well, do you speak the language? Are you going to have somebody in your location that's sort of serving as a on-the-ground contact? that can provide you support? Are you working with a company that can provide you physical and security services? We're going to try to figure out a way to make it happen. Yeah, we rarely say no. In the 4 years I've been here, I've said no 4 times to travel. And once was the graduate student, 2 times were people wanting to go to Iran for conferences, and we didn't have enough time to get the license. And the 3rd time was, I believe, was the one in China. But I don't really count that as saying no. I said yes. Here's how you have to do it. But yeah, so it's very rare for us to say no, absolutely. We try to work with folks. Other questions? And again, that's my contact information. If you ever have any questions, it's very simple. export@psu.edu will get to me or my staff. Thank you.